Disclaimer: the following program is rated H for haram and contains scenes of blasphemy against Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We'll be discussing M103, a motion recently passed in Canada that threatens freedom of speech and criticism of Islam. All blasphemous material in this video was provided by Justin Trudeau's uncut twin brother, Trustin Judo. So please direct all your death threats and fatwas towards him. Now let's get haram.
We cannot tolerate these insults of our Prophet.
According to this Canadian law, if someone sees...
Who cares about the Canadian law?
Okay.
Who cares about the Canadian law? Anybody who insults Prophet Muhammad as your opponent gets killed. Anybody who insults Prophet Muhammad as your opponent gets killed.
Allahu Akbar!
Holy shit, this is gonna be edgy.
You do it in a sneaky way and use code language, maybe you won't get called on.
Anybody who insults Prophet Muhammad as your opponent gets killed.
M103 is a motion that passed in Canada on March 23rd. Its focus is to quell so-called Islamophobia. I like to refer to it as a proto-blasphemy law. As a Canadian, this motion is offensive to me. I think I might be M103phobic. I'll read out the motion, then tell you its dangerous potential and why I must protest. The text of the motion states that in the opinion of the House, the government should recognize the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. This sounds like thought policing. Since when was it the government's job to dictate public opinion? It's the government's job to punish people who violate the law, not control the thoughts and feelings of the population. There are already laws in place upholding against crimes that target people because of their identities. Even problematic speech can land you in a kangaroo court. What does quell mean? If you go by this definition, to quiet or allay, then maybe it seems like they'll use propaganda to reprogram the public's mind to avoid wrongthink. This is already being done by CBC, the Canadian government's propaganda platform, which is funded over $500 million each year. Our taxes pay for our government re-education. This definition, to suppress, put an end to, extinguish, sounds much more authoritarian and militant, which is ultimately the result of restricting free speech. Violators of anti-free speech laws get dealt with by force from the state. What does the word quell entail? You'll find that many of the terms used in this motion are undefined and ambiguous. Is this increasing the public climate of hate and fear? Do I need to be quelled? B. Condemn Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, and take note of House of Commons Petition E411 and the issues raised by it. Let's examine the first part. Islamophobia is mentioned as the focus when compared to forms of discrimination against other groups, which is interesting because a few years ago, statistics showed that Jewish people are most often the victims of hate crimes and almost triple the number of Muslims, despite the Muslim population of Canada being around 3 times larger than the Jewish population. Knowing about the large prevalence of anti-Semitism within Islam, I would be interested in statistics of which groups, relative to their percentage of the population, are perpetrators of the most hate crimes. If the statistics invoked a negative perception of Muslims, would the research be considered Islamophobic? Although one of the justifications for M103 is that hate crimes against Muslims have been vastly increasing since those statistics from 2013, yet their population still greatly outnumbers the other groups that are targeted more frequently. And those more frequently targeted groups are the most frequent groups targeted by Islamic bigotry. Regardless, people should be free to think what they want and express how they feel, provided they're not breaking any laws. And trying to dictate public opinion and make enemies out of critics is not the government's job, and is certainly not going to quell any hatred. The term Islamophobic is also not defined in the text, yet it's Justin Trudeau's new favorite buzzword. He loves it almost as much as he loves the word feminism, which he manages to drop during his defense of M103 to remind us that we are all committing wrongthink if we don't embrace his version of feminism.
We still have a problem because there are men out there who will not say, yes, I am a feminist.
Let's ask Ikra Khalid, the proposer of the motion, why she refused to define Islamophobia within the motion.
Do you ever think that that you could have allayed the Conservatives' concerns by putting a definition of Islamophobia between a couple of commas in that motion?
I'm really looking forward to the committee making that
Yeah, but you
conclusion.
haven't answered my question. Do you ever think you could have allayed their concerns by just
I don't think so, no.
Why not?
Any more questions?
Why don't you answer my question?
I'm interested in that answer. Yeah, we want to know that. What was your question?
So why wouldn't you have felt that you could have allayed their concerns by just putting a definition in the text of the motion? Just put it between a couple of commas?
You know, it was a really collaborative effort amongst all Canadians and amongst all parliamentarians, and I was not able to find consensus. And like I've said before,
in the text of the motion.
I think I've said before as well that, you know, a lot of grassroots organizations.
You can see that she wants Islamophobia to be as ambiguous as possible. That way, she can exert unlimited control over what fits the criteria for Islamophobia. She condescendingly refuses to answer simple and fair questions and refuses to make any changes to the motion that will appease people who are concerned about free speech. She eventually states that Islamophobia means the irrational hate of Muslims that leads to discrimination. However, this definition was purposely excluded from the motion. As we saw in the previous video, Ikra thought that providing a definition of the term would be counterproductive to the motion. How could it possibly be counterproductive unless she has nefarious intentions? And what is irrational hate towards Muslims? Who gets to draw the line between free speech and hate speech? Now, it's noteworthy that Ikra Khalid was born in Pakistan because there is a large Pakistani Muslim population in Canada, and Pakistan is home to some of the strictest Islamic blasphemy laws in the world. Defiling the name of Muhammad leads to a penalty of mandatory death, and sometimes when the authorities aren't quick enough to act, vigilante mobs kill suspected blasphemers. Part of the basis for these blasphemy laws in Pakistan is because the government believes that it is their duty to discourage parochial, racial, tribal, sectarian, and provincial prejudices among the citizens. This sounds a lot like recognizing the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. In Pakistan, these blasphemy laws are also intended to recognize Islam's dominance of the state. It's obvious that M103 is using the government to dominate the political narrative of how Islam functions within Canada. The next part of the motion states that the government should take note of House of Commons petition E411 and the issues raised by it. Let's examine the text of petition E411. Islam is a religion of over 1.5 billion people worldwide. Since its founding more than 1400 years ago, Muslims have contributed and continue to contribute to the positive development of human civilization. This encompasses all areas of human endeavors, including the arts, culture, science, medicine, literature, and much more. This is the correct opinion to have about Islam and Trudeau's government. Individual Muslims, like many other people, have obviously made some positive contributions to society. But the political ideology and religion of Islam has directly and consistently attributed to the oppression of women and civil rights abuses against other groups, especially apostates. Most of the contributions that Islam brings to the world are retrograde compared to the social progress that has been achieved in the West. For example, the left wants you to believe that a woman proudly wearing a hijab is the new feminist symbol of empowerment. Watch this hijab-wearing woman make a tearful speech about how oppressed she is by non-Muslims.
I am simultaneously silenced into shame while being expected to apologize for the actions of a small group of people that do not represent me or any...
Well, guess what? People who commit hate crimes against Muslims do not represent me, nor do they represent the vast majority of people who are critical of Islam. Almost everyone who speaks out against the dangers of Islam has nothing to do with the horrible actions of the Quebec mosque shooter, Alexandre Bissonnette. Yet, this motion implicates criticism against Islam with terrorists like Bissonnette. Media outlets like CBC suggest that his support on Facebook for Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen are to blame for inspiring his actions. In reality, there is a much weaker connection between right-wing populism and terrorists like Bissonnette than there is between Islam and Islamic terrorists.
We all have a responsibility to challenge a growing culture of ignorance rather than justifying xenophobia and prejudice under the veil of free speech.
The veil of free speech? Ha! You're justifying silencing criticism under the veil of social justice.
My heritage is not a political platform to campaign on.
Your heritage is clearly a political campaign to platform on. That's what most of the liberals and NDP are currently doing, and they imply that anyone who disagrees with their opinions regarding Islam is a bigot.
Unless cherished as complex, and as rich as its people.
You're implying that people are only allowed to politicize the positive contributions of your religion and culture. Meanwhile, you are politicizing the negative aspects of Western culture, like those who commit hate crimes, and then conflating them with people who merely criticize your ideology. You sound genuinely upset, but that doesn't legitimize your beliefs. I bet that all the regressive liberals in this building are just spurging all over themselves, listening to a woman in a hijab talk about how oppressive Western society is. One example of an Islamic contribution to a progressive secular society is the pressure that is put on Muslim women to wear religious garbs like the hijab to express themselves as dignified women who pledge allegiance to Islam. Liberals fetishize the hijab as a symbol of female empowerment, when the cultural and religious basis for Muslim women cloaking themselves is to prevent adultery and keep women pure in the eyes of Allah, by making them appear less attractive to men so strange men can better control their sexual urges. This puts a burden on women to not get sexually assaulted. I wonder if my idiot brother Justin is okay with victim blaming. I mean, he's a feminist, right? It makes sense why there's an emerging rape culture amongst Muslim migrants in several European countries. Misogynistic religious beliefs and cultural practices like normalization of hijabs makes non-conforming women seem like more acceptable targets of abuse for some of the less morally inclined Muslim men. I'm sure that many Muslims have contributed positively to society, but in many ways, Islamic influence is incompatible with Western society, and this petition completely omits the latter. It also claims that only an extremely small percentage of Muslims commit acts of terrorism, and then all Muslims are often blamed by non-Muslims. Obviously, most Muslims are not violent terrorists, but these jihadists exist on the extreme end of the spectrum of Islam as a religion and a political ideology. There are several reasons that cause people to have negative opinions of Islam, including Islamists who want to insert their religious values into public institutions, and Islamists encouraging other Muslims not to assimilate to Western values and to define themselves in opposition to non-Muslims, and archaic, tribalistic, and misogynistic values being practiced, spread, and defended by politicians in the media, and Muslim migrants committing sex crimes against non-Muslim minors, abusing welfare while refusing to integrate, while procreating at a faster rate than the rest of the population. Canada has not been as negatively affected by these issues as some European countries, but the Canadian population also has a considerably smaller percentage of Muslims than European countries that are experiencing greater conflict. People should be aware of the connection between the size of a Muslim population and its ability to coexist peacefully within a Western country. Most critics of Islam aren't even against banning Muslim immigration, but are instead for slowing down immigration to ensure greater assimilation rates to produce a monocultural, multi-ethnic society instead of a multicultural society ripe with conflict. Now let's read more of the text.
The government should request that the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage undertake a study on how the government could 1. Develop a whole-of-government approach to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia, in Canada, while ensuring a community-centered focus with a holistic response through evidence-based policymaking.
So this part of the motion is requesting that all applicable branches of the government act against Islamophobia. The Liberals want you to believe that this motion is merely a gesture, an acknowledgement of discrimination against Muslims, as opposed to a precursor for anti-free speech laws. However, motions are usually introduced with the intention to become bills, and then laws. And this motion states that it wants to develop a whole-of-government approach, which suggests that they intend for legislation to be introduced if the committees deem it necessary. The text also states that they will enact policy based on evidence, and that leads us into the last part of the motion.
The government should collect data to contextualize hate crime reports and to conduct needs assessments for impacted communities, and that the committee should present its findings and recommendations to the House no later than 240 calendar days from the adoption of this motion, provided that in its report, the committee should make recommendations that the government may use to better reflect the enshrined rights and freedoms in the Constitution Acts, including the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
So the government will enact policies based on evidence compiled through hate crime reports. Here's an example of this kind of evidence and research that was conducted in the UK regarding Islamophobia. This Islamophobia research team, backed by the government propaganda outlet BBC, developed an Islamophobia radar to target social media posts they deemed to be offensive to Islam right after a devastating Islamic terror attack. And they claim that the criteria for Islamophobia in a social media post includes when people associate Islam with an Islamic terror attack.
So each of these red dots is an anti-Islamic tweet coming from the UK. And that we can see happening right now, that's a digital reaction to the niece attacks.
Massive red mass.
That's right, angry, abusive, anti-Islamic. The Islamophobic tweets that we're measuring here, these are not people that are being angry at the terrorists. It's not people that are being angry at Islamic State. It's people that are being angry at the wider Muslim world. It's people that are blaming Muslims for the terrorist attacks. These are the things which are Islamophobic.
I've already outlined in this video how Islamic extremism exists on a spectrum of Islam that is much more prevalent than other forms of religious or ideological extremism. These cucks are just gaslighting the native British population into their cultural relativist narrative that all religions are equal and real Islam is as pacifistic as modern-day Christianity in Western cultures. Bullshit. So at the very least, we can expect CBC to produce even more regressive liberal propaganda than it already does, and we can expect that the government will use biased data to attempt to either sway public opinion and even possibly change laws to affect free speech in favor of Muslims who want to deflect criticism. This includes censorship and prosecuting a wider variety of people for committing what is declared to fall under the criteria of hate speech, and it's within the realm of possibility for developed Western countries to adopt draconian anti-free speech laws. Germany is a prime example of a nation where the government censors, monitors, and questionably prosecutes people for hate speech. They could also try to tighten the Overton window of accepted political stances within the media regarding immigration. It's rational to state that increasing immigration of Muslims to Canada would be destructive, especially if there's a lack of pressure towards these immigrants to assimilate. We can observe the results in various European countries that have been affected by this. Expressing such opinions could be considered Islamophobia by the Trudeau government, and trying to convince Muslims to modernize and secularize Islam to adhere to Western values could also be considered Islamophobic, which would make the results of increasing Muslim immigration even more dangerous. This motion is also damaging to Muslims or immigrants from Muslim countries in Canada who want to integrate and adopt Western values that aren't present in many Muslim countries like Pakistan. Here's an Iranian refugee's opinion regarding M103.
When I was in Iran, I went to jail because of lack of freedom of speech in my own country. Sunni Muslims criticize Shia Muslims. Shia Muslims criticize Sunni Muslims. What is Islamophobia?
I'm a political refugee from Iran. I've been to prison, I've been under Islamic law, and I know how it starts and I know how it ends. And it always starts with the, for some reason, unity of left and Islamists. And it scares me. I came here to be free. I chose Canada as my second home to be live in a free country. I'm beginning to get really scared. It looks like they're going to basically appease Islamists just to not raise any ruckus or something. They're just going to appease them step by step, and they're not going to stop. They see it as a sign of weakness, so they're going to take more and more, and I'm against that.
So people who have come to Canada for our Canadian values, including freedom of speech and separation of church and state, are being forsaken by Trudeau's government, and M103 is only increasing tensions between Muslims and their critics. Ikra Khalid tries to use hate mail she received after introducing M103 as evidence of Islamophobia so she can further push her agenda that potentially limits free speech and scolds its critics. It's interesting how she provokes hatred against Muslims and then uses the backlash to support her argument. She is emboldening Muslims to take even more offense to criticism against Islam while accusing critics of Islam of bigotry. How again is this supposed to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear? She is also making it harder for secular reformist Muslims like Tarek Fatah to help Muslims secularize to coexist peacefully with Western society. This man is brave, but is looked down upon by many other Muslims for respecting Western values. Tarek Fatah makes many excellent points condemning M103, and even one point that I hadn't yet fully considered.
When we were fighting against Sharia in 2005, there was nobody with us. We were only 5 or 6 people. And the way we defeated it, we told our non-Muslim friends, you better keep shut, because you are the people who will get Sharia in this country when you start attacking the Quran and start saying, well, Muhammad was a pedophile, Muhammad was a pedophile. What did you achieve? We defeated Sharia and got it banned in Ontario by being straightforward, not hateful, and sticking to our principles. And as long as you attack Islam, you play their game. When people tear up the Quran and scatter it on the floor, they did absolute wonders for Ikra Khalid. When people went on camera and said Muhammad is a pedophile, nothing better happened, and there was a thrill in the air. I hate Muslims. Gotcha. And you destroy yourself.
Tarek is adamant about using a working strategy. He makes a good point about how Islamists are much more conscious of strategy than non-Muslim critics of Islam, especially white guys like your boy Trustin Judah.
Do you know who reads The Art of War by Sun Tzu? The jihadis. Do you know who doesn't read this? White people who are anti-Islamists. If they had read this, they would not even have been close to where the Quran was being thrown in a garbage bin outside Toronto City Hall.
Now, I agree with him here, but only to a certain extent. I advise anybody who wants to fight against Islamization to be as convincing as possible, and that can mean avoiding rhetoric like
Muhammad was a pedophile, Muhammad was a pedophile,
and instead formulating coherent, nuanced arguments that are more likely to achieve your intended results. This means that it might not be a good idea to go to a school board meeting about religious accommodations for Islamic prayers in a public school and ripping up a Quran while yelling,
I want to slit your throat!
This is giving the politicians and media a bad guy to point their finger at, and then the Islamists and the left can reinforce their agenda. However, this is my YouTube video, and I will express myself how I want on my video by trying to be informative, entertaining, and edgy. Nobody is being forcefully subjected to watching me burn pictures of the pedophile Muhammad or take a nice golden shower on my idiot brother's face, who, by the way, is not actually our dad's son. It's a family secret. But when mobs of religious zealots threaten people who dare mock or criticize their religion, and the government takes their side, then naturally, I'm going to ridicule these libtards and Islamofascists to the full extent of my free speech before it's taken away. And if my idiot brother Justin wants to go on the record and say, look at this Islamophobic man who's urinating on my face, he's obviously not a feminist, we need tougher hate speech laws, look at all this hate speech, then naturally, all the normies will come watch my video to see my idiot brother Justin receive a nice golden shower while I slip them some red pills about Islamofascism. How's that for a strategy there, Fatah? So ping me on your stupid Islamophobia radars all you want, CBC. I'm standing up against Islamofascism and political correctness, and if that's hate, then I guess I'm a hater. And just because it's funny, and because I won't let thought-policing idiots tell me what to do, I'll sing it loud. We don't need Mohammed, let the motherfucker burn. Burn, motherfucker. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button to blaspheme against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Subscribe for some more edgy social commentary. Follow me on Twitter at EdgyDtv or at EdgyDtv on Minds.com. Hit the notification bell to get alerted whenever I release a new video.
And if you do it in a sneaky way and use coded language, maybe you'll get to slip it through.